Hello, everyone, and thank you so much to the Washington State Women's Commission and the organizers of the AA Women's Small Business Owner Workshop for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Jonathan Herrera, and I serve as the program manager for the Washington Saves program. Washington Saves is a new state-facilitated retirement savings program designed to help workers and small businesses build financial stability, one paycheck at a time. Today, I'll give you a brief overview of why the program was created, how it works, and what employers and workers can expect as we move towards launch in 2027. This conversation is especially important because retirement access gaps continue to disproportionately impact women, communities of color, immigrant communities, and small business employees. In Washington, about 42% of women working in the private sector do not currently have access to a retirement plan through work, and about 34% of Asian American workers in Washington also lack access to an employer-provided retirement plan. And we know access matters. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, but workers are 15 times more likely to save and be on a path towards retirement security when they can do it through a payroll deduction at work. So at its core, Washington Saves is about lowering barriers, helping more workers build long-term security in a way that's simple, portable, and accessible. So let's focus in a little bit more about the situation that the legislature is trying to address when they passed the bill that created this program. And Washington Saves was created in response to a significant retirement savings access gap that exists not only in the United States, but in the state of Washington. About 51% of Americans worry that they're going to run out of money when they're no longer earning a paycheck, and 70% of retirees wish they had started saving earlier. And again, this is not a uniquely Washington problem, but it is one that definitely affects Washington workers. We estimate that about 1.2 million Washington workers do not have access to retirement benefits through their employer. But as I mentioned before, we know that workers are 15 times more likely to be saving and on a path towards retirement security if they have access to a payroll deduction savings plan at work. And I think it's important to note that many small businesses genuinely want to support their employees, but oftentimes offering a traditional retirement plan can feel expensive, complicated, and out of reach for a lot of small businesses in particular. And Washington Saves is intended to create a simpler on-ramp to long-term savings for workers who otherwise might not have access. I think, when we're talking about the access gap, I think it's also important to note that, the retirement savings access gap didn't exist just because a bunch of people didn't plan correctly, right? It didn't happen by accident. I think it's important that we acknowledge that historically, many women, immigrant communities, and communities of color were excluded from wealth building opportunities through policies and systems that limited access to stable employment, to banking, to home ownership, and workplace benefits. And many of those barriers exist today, right? Whether it's wage disparities, lack of employer benefits, chronic financial stress, or distrust that's rooted in past experience with financial systems. We sometimes refer to this as financial trauma, where conversations around money, saving, and investing might feel intimidating, inaccessible, or disconnected from people's day-to-day realities. And I think that's one reason Washington Saves emphasizes simplicity, transparency, and accessibility, and a culturally responsive approach to outreach. So we want this program to feel approachable and practical for workers and small businesses across Washington's diverse communities. So knowing that the best way to get folks saving and on a path towards retirement security was through the workplace, back in 2024, the legislature passed Senate Bill 6069, which was signed into law. As we mentioned, the program is expected to begin launching in July of 2027. We do plan on opening the program for individual participation. So, I keep mentioning that it is designed as a workplace-based retirement savings program, but we know that there are a lot of gig workers, self-employed folks in our communities, and we want to make sure that they have access to the tools that they need to save for their retirement and to build wealth for their future and their families. So this program will be open for individual participation. I think it's also important to note that we're designing this as a public-private partnership. So the state's role in this is going to be to provide oversight and governance, while private financial firms will administer the account and the investments. And importantly, workers are going to be saving in their own portable IRA that belongs to them and follows them throughout their career. We're going to talk about that in a little bit more as we get into the details. But let's talk about a little bit more about the bill that created the program. So not only did Senate Bill 6069 give us the authorization to build this program, it also created a new requirement on Washington employers. So under state law, certain employers that don't currently offer a qualified retirement plan will eventually be required to either offer a qualified plan from the private market or facilitate Washington Saves. So generally, the law applies to employers that have operated in Washington for at least 2 years, have a physical presence here, which basically means if you have employees here, you have a physical presence, and whose employees have collectively worked at least 10,400 employee hours in the previous calendar year. So that's roughly the equivalent of 5 full-time employees, but of course it could be any combination. We could be looking at 5 full-time employees, 10 half-time employees, any combination of employees that will add up to those 10,400 employee hours. And then most importantly, this applies to employers that are not offering a qualified retirement plan, like a 401k, a SEP IRA, a simple IRA. If an employer has one of those in place, they would not need to participate in Washington Saves. And I think that that's a really important feature, because what that really means once this program goes into effect is that employers will have that choice. Employers will be able to decide what is best for themselves, for their business and for their employees. If they decide they want to open a qualified plan from the private market, that's great, because it means increased access to retirement savings programs at work, or they can join the Washington Saves program. From our perspective, as long as more people are gaining access, it's still a win for the legislation. So let's talk about the employer features. Since this is an important thing that's going to impact small businesses, we want to make sure that folks understand what this is going to mean for them. And I'd say that one of the things that we're trying to emphasize, especially when we're speaking with small business owners, is that Washington Saves, we're trying to design it intentionally to reduce administrative burden, right? We want the program to be as easy as possible for employers to facilitate. We're designing this to be completely plug and play. So you plug it in at work and at your place of business and get it running. Employers will not pay fees into the program. Because we're building the program around IRAs, employers will also not be required to match employee contributions. So in other words, because there's no fees and no employer match, we're talking no out-of-pocket cost for employers. And then also importantly, employers are not fiduciaries of the program. So unlike a traditional 401k or other employer-sponsored type of retirement plan where the employer is taking on some responsibility to manage that program, in this case, the fiduciary responsibility for the program lies on our 15-member public board that oversees the program, our small staff that supports the board, and then, of course, our service providers that will contract to help us run the program. Most important to note, employers' role is primarily to facilitate that payroll deduction. So we like to summarize the employer's responsibilities as having 4 simple steps. So employers will need to register by their state required deadline. That July 1st, 2027 date that I've mentioned is the date anticipated for program launch. That is not the compliance deadline for employers. The board still needs to determine what the compliance deadlines are going to be. So just keep in mind, once we launch the program, we'll be communicating to employers a series of compliance deadlines that will roll out over time. Second responsibility for employers will be to submit and maintain a roster of employees. This is how we make sure that all of your employees have access to the program. We are designing it to be an automatic enrollment program. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. But this is the key to making that part function. Third responsibility that employers currently have is distributing program information to employees. Now, we've gotten a lot of feedback from employers recently that they don't want to have to take on this responsibility. So we are trying to shift that responsibility to the program. It'll be the program's responsibility to deliver, welcome packet information and other program information to the employees. And then we'll make a toolkit available for employers that want to play a role helping their employees, know that this is coming out, and then, support their employees in connecting with the program if they need additional support. Fourth and final responsibility, and sort of the second ongoing responsibility for employers, is that employers will then submit employee contributions for any of their participating employees. And this and the maintenance of the roster will sort of be the two ongoing responsibilities that employers will have, right? As employers hire new employees, they'll need to add them to their roster. If employees leave, they can be marked as inactive. And then employers will be required to submit employee contributions for their participating employees as part of their existing payroll process. So let's talk about a few of the program highlights from the Savers perspective, because I know a lot of small business owners are concerned about how this program is going to affect their employees. Mentioned a couple of times in the presentation that we are designing this program as an automatic enrollment program. That's sort of based on what we're seeing as best practices from the private retirement program industry, like 401ks. What this means is that there will be an employee decision period where we'll be communicating with employees, helping them to understand that the program is rolling out, encouraging them to connect with the program. Most importantly, we're letting them know that if they don't opt out within a certain amount of time, we're going to automatically enroll them into the program. But again, it is completely optional because employees can opt out at any time, either during that employee decision period or even after they've already started participating. They can pause or stop their participation at any time. Second, we want employees to have complete control over how much they save. Because it's automatic enrollment, we will be choosing a default investment rate that they will be enrolled at if they don't make a choice of their own. But employees will have complete control over that at any point and can change their contribution rate to something that feels comfortable for them. And as I mentioned before, they can always pause contributions if something happens in their life and they need to take a break from making contributions. Third here on the slide is that employees will be able to choose the investment option that best fits their lifestyle. We've learned from our experience in the 401k world that we don't want to overwhelm people with too many options, but we do want to have a short menu of investment options that sort of allow people to choose investments that fit either their age and time to retirement or their taste in investing, right? Sort of their risk tolerance and things like that. And then last but not least, perhaps most important is that Washington Saves accounts are completely portable. So unlike your traditional 401k or other employer-sponsored retirement plan, these accounts belong to the employee and will follow them along their career wherever they go. If they leave your place of business and end up at another Washington Saves participating employer, they'll be able to continue to make contributions from their new employer into their existing account. So you don't have a bunch of accounts, hanging out at all your old employers. If an employee ends up at an employer that is not participating in Washington Saves, they'll be able to, they'll still own the account. They can ignore it and let it grow on its own. They can continue to make contributions from their bank account if they want to do that, or they can roll that money over into another qualified retirement plan. Most importantly is to note that it is tied to the employee and follows them wherever they go. And it's up to them how they want to use it if they leave your place of business. This slide, I like to say, really gets to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish. Washington Saves is really about lowering barriers to saving and helping workers build long-term financial resilience, right? Automatic enrollment and payroll deduction, an automatic payroll deduction help make saving easier and more consistent for folks. The program also emphasizes transparency, strong protections, and respectful communication because trust matters when we're talking about money and long-term savings. And ultimately, this is about helping workers build wealth over time, right? Complementing Social Security, improving financial resilience, and helping families better withstand financial shocks. At the end of the day, we're really just helping people turn small, steady contributions into long-term financial security. So right now, we're still in the development and outreach stage of the program. I'm just going to go over the timeline a little bit here. Over the last few months and into June, we've been doing a lot of outreach and listening sessions with both employers and savers. And what we've been doing is packaging up that feedback that we've been gathering from these listening sessions, sharing it with the board as we try to coach the board through some of the decisions that they need to make about program design. Once those decisions are made, we'll be able to shift our outreach and education approach to a more education-based approach, right? Helping employers to understand, what the program is, what the deadlines are going to be, and what their responsibilities are. And then also working with folks in the community who are working in the, financial inclusion and wealth building space to help make sure that, savers, our future savers, are informed of the program and understand the program when it starts to roll out at their work. Starting next year in 2027, we'll begin sending employer notifications to, employers that we've identified as subject to the mandate. We'll be encouraging folks to join, as soon as the program launches. The earlier employers join, the earlier their employees will be able to start saving and building wealth for themselves and their families. We also plan on launching a short pilot program at a few months before full program launch, so that we can test the systems and hopefully generate some good stories from employers and savers who are participating, early adopters of the program. And then, of course, July 2027 is anticipated program launch. And I'll note again that is not the compliance deadline for employers. Compliance deadlines are yet to be announced. July 2027 is just program launch, and then we will roll out compliance deadlines from there based on what the board decides. So want to share with you a few ways that you can connect with us. Really, the most exciting part about this opportunity for us to be here and present this information to you is to introduce ourselves to employers within this community, so that we can start building relationships and figure out how we can do more outreach to and engagement with more women business owners and AA and HPI business owners. We would love to partner with you all on outreach. So if you have community organizations that you work with that we could collaborate with on meetings or events that we can use to educate employers and savers about Washington Saves, that would be awesome. And again, we are looking for folks who might be interested in joining our pilot. We have our contact information here on the screen, so you can email us directly, info@wswc.wa.gov, or give us a call here at the office. And of course, sharing our website here, washingtonsaves.com. You can find program details for employers and savers, some printable fact sheets. You can sign up for email updates. And we've just recently launched our socials, so we're building those. And we'd appreciate if anyone were willing to comment, and share on our socials to help share that information with your networks. So, once again, or in conclusion, I'd like to say thank you very much for this opportunity to share the information about Washington Saves with your communities. We think that this is a really important endeavor to try to address some of those systemic barriers, right? The lack of access that have prevented so many folks in our communities from these wealth building opportunities, right? The opportunity to save small amounts over time, invest, and build wealth for ourselves and our families, and hopefully work towards a more dignified retirement. So thank you very much for allowing us to share this information with you, and we will look forward to not only connecting with you, but meeting you in person and working with you in your community to help spread the word, and most importantly, again, help people build financial security for themselves and their families. Thank you again.